we are live yet again here on the Hoplite channel. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I, of course, am your host, Hop, and you clicked on this video because you wanted to see Norse literature, the Saga of the Volsungs, Part 2. So yeah, we are now moving into the second part of the Volsung saga. If you come in here watching Part 1, I appreciate everybody coming back to see Part 2. Yeah, we kicked off Part 1 of the Volsung saga in the last video, and yeah, we are now about halfway through, after this video is over, halfway through the Norse literature series. So if you've watched the whole series, even better. I appreciate that as well. So we're going to pick up in Part 2 with the introduction of the hero and the main character of the Saga of the Volsungs, Sigurd. So if you are coming to this video after seeing Part 1, you know we left off with the story of Sigurd's father and his, I guess, stepmother, but that's a different story. His father, Sigmund. And we learned about the genealogy and the ancestry of Sigurd in Part 1. But to recap, I did this flow chart here so that everybody will be up to speed as to where we were and where we're going. Right, so the Saga of the Volsungs, of course, began with King Volsung. Although it didn't really quite begin with him, but the saga is named after him. It's his house where this story, I guess, took shape. And we know from Part 1 that King Volsung was sent the daughter of Hrimir, Hlod, and Hlod is a giantess. So Volsung, we know his lineage comes directly from Odin, and by marrying a giantess, you could say that Sigmund is, you know, a fraction of a god and a fraction of a giant and a fraction of a man. So he's essentially the demigod status, like Hercules or Achilles would be. Though I believe Achilles wasn't really a demigod. No, I take that back. He was a daughter of a goddess. And we know Hercules was the son of Zeus, bastard son of Zeus. Illegitimate, sorry. Yeah, bastard, right. Same thing. Anyway, we find in this segment of the Volsung saga, at the end of 1, Sigmund's sister, they have a kid, Svinhjotli. Signy dies at the end of Part 1 we covered. She self-immolates with King Sigurd after they take revenge for the death of King Volsung. Svinhjotli dies shortly thereafter, although we won't cover that chapter since he's out of the picture. But in Part 2 we find that Sigmund remarries, and he marries a woman named Hjordis. And Hjordis and Sigmund have Sigurd as their issue. So we finally get to Sigurd. From all of this and everything beforehand, starting with Odin, yeah, we get to Sigurd. But in this segment, I want you to pay attention to certain themes that come up. This part, I think, will be the most enlightening for people that are familiar with Norse mythology, but people who are also fans of the J.R.R. Tolkien universe of fantasy, as well as the fantasy genre in general. A lot of source material and inspiration comes from the Saga of the Volsungs, and in these chapters we'll cover some of those stories. So in this segment we'll be introduced to Fafnir the dragon. We'll meet Regin, the foster father of Sigurd, who I believe actually appears in the Saga of Hrolf-Kraki as well. Regin is one of the men who looks after, I believe, King Hror and Helgi. So he has a foster father role in both sagas. We'll also be introduced to Gram, the hair splitter. Gram is essentially the mythical weapon of Sigurd. It is this mystical sword that has incredible properties and can literally split hairs. It is akin to Arthur's Excalibur. And lastly, we learn of the curse of gold and how Fafnir plays a role in that, and how Sigurd's downfall is foretold because of what happens between him, Fafnir, and the treasure. Right. Okay. So this is it again, once more, Saga of Volsungs, Penguin Classics. We are going to pick up sort of where we left off, where Sigmund marries Hjordis. But before we do, let's pour a beverage, right? Oh yeah. Another standard sweet mead. Slightly chilled, as I always like it. Okay. Slightly chilled mead. All right, let's go. Good stuff. Okay, we turn now to page 52, chapter 11, Sigmund marries Hjordis. And it begins. There was a king named Eylimi. He was powerful and famous. His daughter was named Hjordis, the fairest and wisest of all women. King Sigmund heard that she and none other was a match for him. Sigmund set out to visit King Eylimi. King Eylimi prepared a great feast for Sigmund to be held on the condition that Sigmund had not come with the intention of fighting. Messages were exchanged between them, confirming that the purpose this time was friendship and not war. The banquet was prepared with the best provisions, and many people were present. Everywhere he went, King Sigmund was provided with a marketplace and given other amenities for his journey. They arrived now at the feast, and the two kings shared one hall. King Livgini, the son of King Hunding, had also come. He too wanted to become King Eylimi's son-in-law. It was apparent to King Eylimi that both men could not succeed in the same errand, and he also thought it likely that trouble might be expected from if one of the two failed. Then the king said to his daughter, "You are a wise woman, and I have said that you shall choose your own husband. Choose now between these two kings, and I will decide as you do." She answered, "The decision is difficult, yet I choose the most famous king, and that is King Sigmund, although he is very old." Thus she was given to King Sigmund, and King Livgi went away. Sigmund was married, receiving Hjordis as his bride. Each successive day they feasted better with more zeal. After this, King Sigmund returned home to Hunland, and his father-in-law, King Eylimi, came with him, and Sigmund now tended to his kingdom. King Livgi and his brothers now gathered an army and went against King Sigmund. Because although they had always received the short end in their previous dealings, this new development was one too many. Now they intended to destroy the pride of the Volsungs. They arrived in Hunland and sent word to King Sigmund. They did not want to sneak up on him, and they were certain that he would not run away. King Sigmund said he would come to battle, and he gathered an army. But Hjordis, together with a bondwoman and great wealth, was driven to a forest. There Hjordis stayed during the fighting. The Vikings leapt down from their ships with an unconquerable army. King Sigmund and Eylimi raised their banners, and then the trumpets were blown. King Sigmund now let out sound his horn, the one his father had owned, and urged his men forward. Sigmund had a much smaller force. A fierce battle commenced. And although Sigmund was old, he fought hard and was always at the front of his men. Neither shield nor mail coat could withstand him. And again, that day he went through the ranks of his enemies, and no one could foresee how it would end between them. Many a spear and arrow was cast in the air. Sigmund's spaewoman, however, shielded him so well that he remained unscathed, and no one could count how many men fell before him. Both his arms were bloody to the shoulder. The battle had been going for some time when a man came into the fight. He had a wide-brimmed hat that sloped over his face, and he wore a black hooded cloak. He had one eye, and he held a spear in his hand. This man came up against King Sigmund, raising the spear before him. When Sigmund struck hard with his sword, it broke in two against the spear. Then the tide of battle turned, for King Sigmund's luck was now gone, and many of his men fell. The king did not seek to protect himself and fiercely urged his men on. Now it was as they say, no one is able against many. Okay. These poor Volsung guys, right? They just want to get married, they just want to settle down, but always they offend somebody, or somebody comes to the feast and asks a favor, the favor doesn't get granted, that guy takes it personally, raises an army, and comes to wage war against the Volsungs. It seems like they're cursed to this cycle, right? It happened to Volsung, it happened to Sigmund here. Yeah, so what happens here is that Sigmund, after losing his sister and his son by her, he decides to marry, or wishes to marry, the daughter of this king Eylimi. And the king lets Hjordis decide for herself. And I guess she had a choice between Sigmund and this one guy whose name is ridiculous to pronounce, Lyngvi, L-Y-N-G-V-I. Yeah, Lyngvi, whatever. So it's between Lyngvi and Sigmund. And she says, well, obviously, I want status, right? I'm going to choose the more famous of the two kings. Even though he's an old man, he's more famous. So it's going to be Sigmund. And Sigmund's like, okay, cool, it's me. So yeah, well, we'll feast. We'll feast tomorrow. We'll feast the day after. Each feast will be better than the last. Then we'll sail back to Hunland, and it'll be happily ever after. Well, not so fast. King Lyngvi takes it personally that he wasn't chosen and decides to raise an army, right, like always, and wage war in Hunland against Sigmund and his father-in-law, King Eylimi. They raise an army, although it's much smaller now. He rushes Hjordis away so she can't be taken harmed in the battle. She hides in the forest. The bondwoman goes with her. And Sigmund wages war against King Lyngvi with his father-in-law, King Eylimi. They lose, sadly, even though all of the shield maidens did their best to protect him. It seems that somebody walks on the battlefield and he's a one-eyed traveler, right? Does this sound familiar? Right? It's almost like, who is this guy? Does anybody know yet? It's like, come on. It's like, how many times does this guy have to show up before people figure it out and just say what it is? So we'll say it. It's the one-eyed god. It's the Allfather, Odin. And now Odin reintroduces himself into the Saga of the Volsungs, but he doesn't come as a benefactor. It seems like he comes to wage war against the Volsungs themselves along with their enemies. And Sigmund sees this man walking through the field of the battle with his spear and his cloak, and he swings his father's sword, Volsung's sword, down at this one-eyed man in the cloak. And the man holds up his spear, which of course is Odin's spear, Gungnir. It's the weapon of the father of the gods. You're not going to break it. And what happens instead? Sigmund's sword actually breaks in two. Okay, so the sword is broken. If you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, of Tolkien's mythology, keep that in mind, right? Sigmund's sword is broken in two as he tries to strike Odin. And when he sees that it breaks in two, the tide of battle turns against him, and now he seems like he has to accept his fate, that this is going to be the end. Okay, we'll go now to page 53. Hjordis remarries. And it says, King Sigmund, along with King Eylimi, his father-in-law, fell in this battle at the head of his troops. The larger part of Sigmund's force fell with him. King Lyngvi now advanced toward the royal estate with the intention of seizing the princess, but in this he failed. He obtained there neither woman nor wealth. He traveled now through the land and placed his men throughout the kingdom. He believed he had killed all of the Volsung kin, and that nothing more was to be feared from them. That night after battle, Hjordis went out among the slain and came to where King Sigmund lay. She asked if he could be healed. He, however, answered, Many a man lives where there is little hope, but my luck has forsaken me, so that I do not want to let myself be healed. Odin does not want me to wield the sword, since it is now broken. I have fought battles while it pleased him. She answered, I would lack nothing if you were healed and took revenge for my father. The king said, That is intended for another. You are carrying a son. Raise him well and carefully, for he will be an excellent boy, the foremost of our line. Guard well the broken pieces of the sword. From them can be made a good sword, which will be called Gram. Our son will bear it, and it will accomplish many great deeds, which will never be forgotten. And his name will endure while the world remains. I am content with this. But my wounds tire me, and I will now visit our kinsmen who have gone on before. Hjordis sat by him now until he died, and then day was breaking. She saw that many ships had landed. She spoke to her slave woman, We will exchange clothes, and you shall use my name and say you are a king's daughter. And this they did. The Vikings could see the great carnage and also the women heading for the woods. They recognized that an important event had occurred, and so they leapt from the ships. Alf, the son of King Hjalprik of Denmark, led this force. He had sailed along the coast with his army. They reached the battlefield and saw there the large number of the dead. King Alf now issued orders to look for the women, and this was done. He asked the women who they were, as little could be distinguished from their appearance. The bondwoman answered for both of them. She told of the fall of King Sigmund and King Elimi, along with many other great men, and said who had caused this. Alf asked if they knew where the king's treasure was concealed. The bondwoman replied, "It is certainly to be expected that we would know." And she showed them the way to the treasure. They found enormous wealth, so much that the men thought they had never seen an equal amount gathered one place, or more precious things. They carried the wealth to King Alf's ships. Hjordis and the slave woman followed him. He now returned to his kingdom and made known that these kings had fallen, who were the most famous of men. The king sat at the helm of the ship, and the women sat on the first bench. He spoke with them and listened carefully to what they said. The king returned home to his kingdom with much wealth. Alf was the most able of men. And when he had been home a short while, the queen asked her son, Alf, "Why does the fair woman wear fewer rings and lesser clothing? It seems to me that she is nobler, whom you have made less of." He replied, "I have suspected that her manner is not that of a serving woman's. When we first met, she well knew how to greet men of rank. I shall put this to a test." Now one time while they were drinking, the king called with the women and said, "How do you note the break of day when the night grows light, if you cannot see the heavenly bodies?" The maidservant answered, "This is how I note it. As a child I was in the habit of drinking quite a bit before dawn, and when I stopped doing that, I would still wake up at the same time, and that is my signal." The king smiled at this reply and said, "That is a poor habit for a king's daughter." Then he turned to Hjordis and asked her name. She answered him, "My father gave me a small gold ring with this characteristic. Just before daybreak, it becomes cold on my finger. That is how I know." The king answered, "Gold was certainly abundant if the serving girls wore it, and you have hidden from me long enough. I would have treated you as if you were both children of the same king if you had told me, but I shall treat you in even a better way, as you deserve. You shall be my wife, and I shall pay you dowry when you have given birth to a child." She replied and told the complete truth about her situation. She stayed there now with much honor and was thought the most worthy of women. Okay. So it seems like it doesn't turn out all that bad for Hjordis so far, right? So this guy, King Lingvi, he came wanting to take Hjordis for his own, but he raids the kingdom of Sigmund after Sigmund falls, doesn't find any women, and I guess he just kind of gives up. But then this guy, Alf, right, from Denmark they say, or Melmac, whatever, he makes landfall with his Vikings. He sees two women scurrying in the woods, and before they had done so, Hjordis and the servant woman exchanged clothes so that one would be mistaken for the other. So Alf says, "Okay, ladies, both of you get on board. We're going back to my place. We're sailing for Denmark." And he talks to them while they're on the ship. And I guess Alf comes back home and talks with his mother. And the mother already suspects something's up. She's like, "Why does the woman who's better looking wear the shabbier clothes than the woman who's not as good looking?" And Alf says, "Yeah, I kind of thought this was weird myself, Mom. So I'm going to put this to a test and see if I can figure out what's going on here." And I guess he asks the women, "How do you tell if it's, when daybreak is coming or not?" And the servant woman, God love her, heart of gold, sweet lass, she says, "Well, when I was younger, I would just get really drunk and I would sleep through the morning. But when I stopped boozing so much, I found that I would wake up just before daybreak. That's how I could tell it was almost daybreak." And Alf just looks at her and says, "Yeah, that's cool and all, but I don't think the daughter of a king would just get, plowed every night and then stop drinking one day and discover that that's when daybreak happens." And then he asks Hjordis, "How do you tell?" And then she says, "Oh, well, my dad gave me a gold ring, and whenever the ring turned cold, that meant daybreak." And he said, "Oh, your dad gave you a gold ring, huh?" And this chick over here, she used to get poo-faced, and that's how she could tell if the sun was coming up, is if she wasn't drunk, she would wake up. Yeah, I think you're actually the daughter of the king and not this chick." And she says, "Okay, well, I guess we kind of gave ourselves away there. But here's the deal. Yeah, I am Hjordis. She's a slave woman. Take mercy." Alf says, I'll have mercy. Yeah, but here's how it's going to work. You and I will get married. So Hjordis marries Alf. He gives her a dowry, which is nice. And that's how Alf decides to deal with things. And I guess Hjordis, despite the deception from the get-go, is forgiven this, and she's considered the most worthy of women. Okay, now we'll move to chapter 13, page 55, the birth of Sigurd. It is now said that Hjordis gave birth to a son, and the boy was brought before Alf's father, King Hjálprik. The king was pleased when he saw the boy's piercing eyes. He said that no one would be his equal. The child was sprinkled with water and named Sigurd. All say one thing about him, that none was his match in conduct and size. He was raised there with King Hjálprik, and all show him great affection. And when all the most renowned men and kings in ancient sagas are named, Sigurd must be counted the foremost in strength and accomplishments, in zeal and valor. Of these qualities he possessed more than any other man in the northern world. Sigurd grew up there with Hjálprik and was loved by everyone. Hjálprik betrothed Hjordis to King Alf and fixed her dowry. Regin, the son of Hridmar, was Sigurd's foster father. He taught Sigurd sports, chess, and runes. Among many other things, he also taught Sigurd to speak in several tongues, as was the custom for a king's son. One time, when they were together, Regin asked Sigurd if he knew how much wealth his father had and who was guarding it. Sigurd answered and said that the kings watched over it. Regin said, "Do you trust them completely?" Sigurd replied, "It is fitting that they guard it as long as it suits me, for they can watch over it better than I." Regin came another time to talk to Sigurd and said, "It is strange that you want to be the stable boy of kings or to go about like a vagrant." Sigurd answered, "That is not true, for I rule over everything with them. I can take whatever I want." Regin said, "Ask him to give you a horse." "It will be done as soon as I wish," answered Sigurd. Sigurd met with the kings. Then the king said to Sigurd, "What do you want from us?" Sigurd replied, "I would accept a horse for my entertainment." The king said, "Choose yourself a horse and anything else you want that we possess." The next day Sigurd went to the forest and met an old man with a long beard. The man was unknown to Sigurd. He asked where Sigurd was going. Sigurd answered, "I am going to choose a horse. Advise me in this." The man responded, "Let us go and drive them to the river called Bjösilorn." They drove the horses out into the deep river, and all swam ashore but one. Sigurd took this one. It was gray in color, young in age, very large and handsome. No one had ever mounted this steed. The bearded man said, "This horse is descended from Sleipnir. He must be raised carefully, because he will become better than any other horse." The man then disappeared. Sigurd called the horse Grani, and he was the best horse there ever was. It was Odin whom Sigurd had met. Again Regin spoke to Sigurd. "You have too little wealth. It vexes me that you run around like a messenger boy, but I can tell you where there is great wealth to be had, and it is likely that there will be honor in seeking it and glory should you acquire it." Sigurd asked where this wealth might be, and who was watching over it. Regin answered, "He is named Fafnir, and he is lying a short way from here at a place called Ginniheath. When you get there, you will say that never have you seen in one place more riches and gold, and you will not need more, even if you become the oldest and most famous of kings." Sigurd answered, "Although I am young, I know the nature of this serpent, and I have heard that no one dare go against him because of his size and ferocity." Regin replied, "That is not true. His size is no different from that of other grass snakes, and more is made of him than it deserves. And so it would seem to your forefathers. Although you are of Volsung stock, you do not appear to have the spirit of that kin, which is figured the more foremost in every form of distinction." Sigurd said, "It may be that I do not have much of their valor or skill, but there is no need to taunt me when I am yet little past childhood. And why do you urge me on so strongly?" Regin replied, "There is a tale behind this, and I will tell it to you." "Let me hear it," said Sigurd. All right. So at long last, we finally meet the hero here, Sigurd. And it turns out that Hjordis obviously was carrying the son of Sigmund, and I guess Alf and even Regin are kind of aware of this fact. So Alf, despite taking the wife of Sigmund, allows her to carry the child to term, and he raises him as though it's his own son. So it's almost like he is signing up to be a stepdad, like pre-birth. Which I don't know, like in these days, things were pretty vicious. I don't know why he would elect to do that. But Alf's, I guess, a good guy. So he decides to marry Hjordis, despite the fact she's carrying, Sigmund's kid. The kid's born. King Hjalprik and Alf, I guess, decide to raise them together. So Alf and Hjalprik, Alf's father, raise Sigurd as their own. And Regin steps in as a foster father for him. And he teaches him chess, runes, and sports, which is cool. But he seems to kind of taunt Sigurd into going on this adventure to meet the dragon Fafnir. And even Sigurd, being this young, is aware of the legend of Fafnir. But Regin tells him, people make a lot of noise and exaggeration about this dragon size. He's actually an average-sized dragon, maybe even below average. So yeah, you could go there and you could kill him and take his gold, and you'd be the most famous of kings and the wealthiest of kings, even if you lived 1,000 years. And even Sigurd is kind of wondering, like, well, why are you so, why are you so pumped about me going to kill this dragon and get this gold? Like, what's in it for you? So Regin, I guess, understands he has to come up with an explanation and is going to give him one. And we'll find out about that in a moment here. And we'll read chapter 14, The Otter's Ransom, page 57. And Regin said, "This tale begins with my father, who was named Hridmar, a great and wealthy man. One of his sons was named Fafnir, another Otter, and I was the third, the least accomplished and the least honored. I knew how to work iron as well as silver and gold, and from everything I could make something useful. My brother Otter had a different occupation in nature. He was a great fisherman and surpassed other men in this skill. He had the likeness of an otter during the day and was always in the river bringing up fish in his mouth. He brought his catch to his father and thus greatly helped him. He was in many ways like an otter. He came home late and ate alone with his eyes shut, because he could not stand seeing his food diminish. Fafnir was by far the largest and fiercest of the sons, and he wanted to call everything his own. There was a dwarf named Andvari, said Regin. He was always in the waterfall called Andvari's Fall. He was in the shape of a pike and caught food there for himself, for there were many fish in the falls. My brother Otter used to go into the waterfall and bring up the fish in his mouth, laying them one by one on the bank. Odin, Loki, and Honir were traveling and came to Andvari's Fall. Otter had caught a salmon and was eating it, half dozing on the river bank. Loki took a stone and struck the otter to death. The Aesir considered themselves fortunate in their catch and skinned the otter. That evening they came to Hreidmir's and showed him the catch. Then we seized them, imposing as their fine and ransom that they must fill the skin with gold and cover the outside with red gold. They sent Loki to obtain the gold. He went to Ran and got her net. Next he went to Andvari's Fall and cast the net out for the pike and leapt in the net. Then Loki said, "Which is the fish that runs through the flood and knows not to guard himself from danger? Your head, ransom it for hell, and find me the fire of the well. Andvari is my name. Odin was my father. Many a falls have I fared over. A wretched Norn destined in ancient days that I should wade in water." Loki saw Andvari's gold, and when Andvari had handed over the gold, he kept one ring back. But Loki took it from him. The dwarf went into the rock and said that the gold ring would be the death of whoever owned it, and the same applied to all the gold. The Aesir delivered the riches to Hridmar, stuffed the otter skin, and set it on its feet. They then had to pile up the gold next to it and cover the outside. And when they had done, Hridmar came forward and saw one whisker and demanded that it be covered. Then Odin drew the ring Andravaranaut from his hand and covered the hair. Then Loki said, "With gold you are now paid, and as payment you have much for my head. No ease is assigned to your son, death it is to you both." Afterward, Fafnir killed his father, continued Regin, and it was murder since he hid the body. I obtained none of the treasure. Fafnir became so ill-natured that he set out for the wilds and allowed no one to enjoy the treasure but himself. He has since become the most evil serpent and lies now upon his horde. Afterward, I traveled to the king and became his smith. And this is the story of how I lost the legacy of my father and compensation for my brother. Gold has since been called Otter's ransom and is spoken of as such. Sigurd answered, "You have lost much, and your kinsmen have been vile." Okay, so yeah. Regin comes clean with Sigurd and tells him the story of how the Aesir killed his brother Otter. And Loki, of course, being the trickster god, he ends up screwing things up. He keeps one of the rings, And as it says, Anvari's gold, right, because Anvari is the pike, he said the dwarf went to the rock and said that the gold ring would be the death of whoever owned it. And the same applied to gold. So as we said, the curse of the gold, right? And this ring, this golden ring, will be the death of whoever owns it. As I said when we started this segment, Tolkien's mythology, right? The golden ring, the ring of power, the ring that will doom the one who carries it. This is from this story here. This is Otter's ransom. And for the killing of Otter and the skinning of him, the Aesir have to pay this price. And they have to fill it with gold and red gold on the outside. And what happens after Odin puts the one gold ring to cover the whisker? Fafnir kills his father because he wants the gold for himself. And this is the curse of Fafnir as the dragon, right? He sits on this hoard of treasure. And this treasure is his greed. And this greed is his curse. And he takes the form of this serpent as a penalty for it. And again, this is going back to the Tolkien mythology from Lord of the Rings. Fafnir is Smaug, right? Smaug is this giant dragon that lies under I think it's the Misty Mountain. Don't quote me on that one, but it's the dwarves' treasure that is now guarded by this fire-breathing dragon, Smaug. And he sleeps on top of this treasure, and this treasure is all he cares about and all he's concerned with. It is his greed that binds him to this hoard of treasure, and it is this greed that dooms him to this shape of Fafnir, the serpent, like Smaug. So yeah, this is essentially what has given Regin the motivation to ask Sigurd to avenge his father's death from Fafnir and perhaps secure the treasure for himself, and maybe some for Sigurd too, because he's obviously going to actually do the deed himself. Anyway, we'll move next to the Regin fashions Gram, page 59. Sigurd said, "Make me a sword now with your skill, so that it is equal has never been made. Do this, and I will be able to work great deeds if courage helps, and if you want me to kill this dragon." Regin said, "With confidence I shall make it, and you will be able to kill Fafnir with this sword." Regin now made a sword. He gave it to Sigurd, who took it and said, "This is your smithying, Regin." Sigurd struck the anvil, and the sword broke. He threw down the blade and told Regin to forge another, a better one. Regin made a second sword and brought to Sigurd. He considered it. "You will like this one, though you are a hard man to forge for." Sigurd tried the sword, and he broke it like the first one. Then Sigurd said to Regin, "You are untrustworthy, just like your forefathers." Sigurd went now to his mother. She greeted him well. They talked with each other and drank. Then Sigurd said, "Have I heard rightly that King Sigmund gave you the sword Gram in 2 pieces?" "That is true," she replied. "Give it to me," said Sigurd. "I wish to have it." She said he was likely to win renown and gave him the sword. Sigurd met now with Regin and told him to make a sword worthy of these fragments. Regin became angry and went to his forge with the pieces of the sword. He thought Sigurd demanding about the metalwork. Now Regin made a sword, and when he brought it out to the forge, it seemed to the apprentices as if the flames were leaping from the edges. He told Sigurd to take the sword and said he was no swordsmith if this one broke. Sigurd hewed at the anvil and split it to its base. The blade did not shatter or break. He praised the sword highly and went to the river with a tuft of wool, which he threw in against the current. The sword cut the wool in 2 when the tuft ran against the blade. Sigurd went home contented. Regin said, "You must fulfill your vow now that I have made the sword, and go and meet Fafnir." Sigurd replied, "I will fulfill it, but first there is another task. I must avenge my father." The older Sigurd grew, the more he was loved, and every mother's child held him dear. All right. So now we've been introduced to the legend of Fafnir, and we learn of the legend of Gram. And like I said, with the story of Excalibur, that is Arthur's mythical sword. That is the magical weapon that makes that hero so famous, because a famous hero must wield a famous weapon. And the same is true for Sigurd. Gram. And Gram is forged by Regin, who is a smith, and he can't make a suitable sword for Sigurd because Sigurd is the greatest and the most epic of epic heroes. So he needs an epic sword. So he goes to his mother and says, "This guy can't make me a real sword. I heard Dad, before he died, gave you the fragments of his broken sword. Can I have them? She goes, sure. And he gives these sword fragments to Regin. Regin fashions his sword. And as he does, the apprentices, are just spellbound by the magic that is imbued in this weapon. And as his flames leap off the edges of the sword. And then Sigurd takes the sword and he inspects it and he swings it down at the anvil and cuts it to its base. Then he takes it to a river and he throws a tuft of wool, and as the current brings the wool towards the sword's edge, the current is enough to pull the wool to the blade, and the blade splits the hairs of the tuft. Pretty sharp. So, what does this sound like? Narsil, right? It sounds like Aragorn's sword, Narsil, that is Isildur's sword that was broken by Sauron and is reforged by the elves, given to Aragorn because he will be the next king of men in the Return of the King in the Lord of the Rings series, right? So Graham is Narsil, Aragorn is essentially Sigurd. Tolkien, took that story and wove it into the Lord of the Rings mythology in that fantasy novel as well. Anyway, so now we'll go to the next chapter. Sigurd kills Lyngvi and Hjorvard and all the others. Page 61. Now Sigurd met with the kings and said to them, I have been here a while, and I am indebted to you for your affection and esteem. But now I want to leave this country and find the sons of Hunding. I want them to know that the Volsungs are all not dead. I would like your support in this undertaking. The king said they would supply everything that Sigurd asked for. A large force was prepared. Everything was arranged most carefully, both ships and armaments, so that his expedition would be more magnificent than before. Sigurd captained the largest and most splendid dragon ship. The sails were elaborately worked and glorious to see. The men sailed with a fair wind, and when a few days had passed, the weather grew foul and a great storm arose, churning the sea as if it were foaming with blood. Although the sails might rip, Sigurd did not order them shortened. Rather, he commanded each sail be higher than before. And when they sailed by a certain craggy headland, a man called up to the ship and asked who was in command of the army. He was told their leader was Sigurd, the son of Sigmund, now the most famous of young men. The man answered, Everyone says one thing about him, that no king's son can equal him. I would like you to lower your sails on one of your ships and take me with you. They asked his name, and he answered, As Snikar they hailed me, when Hugin I gladdened, and when O young Volsung I vanquished. Now you may address the old man of this rock as Feng or Fjolnir. From here I would take passage. They turned toward land and took the old man aboard. The wind now subsided, and they sailed until they landed in the kingdom of the sons of Hunding. Then Fjolnir disappeared. At once they unleashed fire and iron, killing men and burning settlements, destroying as they went. Many fled from them to King Lyngvi and told him the army had come to land and was advancing with more ferocity than ever before had been seen. They said that the sons of Hunding had not been far-sighted when they claimed that the Volsungs need not be feared, for now Sigurd, the son of Sigmund, is leading the army. King Lyngvi summoned men to arms throughout his kingdom. He refused to flee, and he called to his side every man who would support him. He and his brothers went against Sigurd with a mighty force, and then the fiercest of battles began with them. Masses of spears and arrows could be seen flying through the air. Axes swung violently, shields were split, armor cut open, helmets slashed, and skulls cloven. Many men fell to the ground. When the battle had gone on for a very long time, Sigurd advanced past the standards, holding in his hand the sword Gram. He hewed both men and horses and went through the ranks so that both his arms were bloody to the shoulder. People fled from him as he advanced, and neither helmet nor mail coat withstood him. No one thought he had ever seen such a man before. The battle lasted a long time with heavy slaughter and fierce encounters, and it happened there, as is usual when the home army attacks, that it could not advance. So many men fell ranks of the sons of Hunding that no one knew their number, and Sigurd was at the front of his troops. Then the sons of King Hunding attacked him. Sigurd struck at King Lyngvi and split his helmet and his head and his armored body. After that he cut Lyngvi's brother Hjorvard into 2 pieces. Then he killed all the sons of Hunding who were still alive, along with the larger part of the army. Sigurd now returned home with a fine victory and the great wealth and glory he had obtained in the venture. Banquets were prepared for him in the kingdom. When Sigurd had become home a short time, Regin came to speak with him and said, Now you will want to strike the helmet from Fafnir, as you have promised, because you have now avenged your father and your kinsmen. Sigurd answered, I will fulfill my promise. It will not escape my thoughts. Okay. So Sigurd is he's becoming a man now. He's got his horse, which Odin essentially gifted him, told him it was descended from Sleipnir, and he has Gram, which is his father's sword, that has been reforged and is better than it ever was. So he's got a great horse, he's got a great sword, and he's a Volsung. So he decides to first set out to avenge his father Sigmund's death, and then fulfill his promise to Regin, which is the death of Fafnir. So what does he do? He asks the kings that raised him in the land of Alf and Hjálprek, please support me in this. They say, sure kid, whatever you want, you're the best. They give him all this armor, they give him all these men, they give him all these ships. He lands, and they pick up this guy, and they don't really mention more about him, but they say that his name is Feng or Fjolnir. Unknown who this could have been, but one more time, this could have possibly been Odin as well, working through the lives of the Volsung. He helped kill Sigmund, but he now is helping Sigurd. So it's possible that this man on this voyage was Odin himself, and that he was using his magic to make sure Sigurd was victorious in this battle. Anyone's guess. But he cleaves down King Lingvi, and again King Hjorvard shows up out of nowhere. He's, I guess, Lingvi's brother-in-law, or brother, I can't remember here. And he's cut down literally in two. So poor King Hjorvard, he can't cut a break in this saga or the saga of King Hrolf Kraki. Sigurd cuts down Lingvi. He cuts down Hjorvard. He cuts down all of the men in this army because he's wielding Gram. It's the most famous of all weapons. He's the most famous of all heroes. And then he returns home. And of course Regin says, okay, so yeah, you got your revenge. Cool. Glad to hear it. You're going to go get Fafnir now, right? And Sigurd says to Regin, I will fulfill my promise as I intended. So let's continue now to Regin and Sigurd go riding, page 63. Now Sigurd and Regin rode up to the heath and onto the track along which Fafnir was accustomed to crawl when he went drink. And it is said that this cliff was 30 fathoms high at the spot where Fafnir lay to get water. Then Sigurd said, you told me, Regin, that this dragon was no larger than a serpent, but his tracks seem excessively large to me. Regin said, dig a ditch and sit in it, and then when the serpent crawls to the water, pierce him in the heart and thus cause his death. You will win great renown from such a deed. Sigurd asked, but what will happen if I get in the way of the dragon's blood? No one can advise you if you are afraid of everything. You are not like your kin in courage, replied Regin. Now Sigurd rode onto the heath, and Regin ran off in fear. Sigurd dug a ditch, and while he was working on it, an old man with a long beard came to him and asked him what he was doing. Sigurd told him. Then the old man responded, that is ill-advised. Dig several ditches for the blood to run into. Then you sit in the one of them and thrust at the heart of the worm. Then this man disappeared. Sigurd dug the ditches in the manner described to him. When the worm crawled to the water, the earth quaked mightily, so that all the ground nearby shook. He blew poison all over the path before him. But Sigurd was neither afraid nor concerned by the din. And when the serpent crawled over the pit, Sigurd plunged the sword up to the left shoulder so that it sank to the hilt. Then Sigurd leapt up out of the ditch and drew the sword out of the serpent. His arms were all bloody to the shoulder, and when the huge worm felt his mortal wound, he thrashed his head and his tail, destroying everything that got in the way. When Fafnir received his death wound, he asked, who are you? Or who is your father? Or who is your family? Or who are you so impudent that you dare to bear weapons against me? Sigurd replied, my family is unknown to men. I am called the noble beast. I have neither father nor mother, and I have traveled alone. Fafnir answered, if you have neither father nor mother, from what wonder were you born? And although you will not tell me your name on my dying day, you know that you are lying. He answered, my name is Sigurd, and my father is Sigmund. Fafnir then asked, who urged you on this deed, and why did you let yourself be persuaded? Have you not heard that all people are afraid of me and my helm of terror? Boy with the sharp eyes, you had a keen father, Sigurd said. Sigurd said, a hard mind wedded me for this deed, and I was supporting it by strong hand and this sharp sword, which you are now familiar with. Few are bold in old age who are cowardly in childhood. Fafnir said, I know that if you had grown up with your kinsmen, you would know how to fight when angered, but it is yet stranger that a prisoner taken in war should have dared to fight me, because few captives are valiant in a fight. Sigurd spoke, you revile me for being removed from my kinsmen. Even though I was taken in war, I was not bound, and you have discovered that I was free. Fafnir answered, You take everything I say as spoken with malice, but this gold that was mine will be your death. Sigurd replied, Everyone wants to have wealth until that one day, but everyone must die sometime. Fafnir said, You do not want to heed my advice, but you will drown if you voyage unwarily by sea. Remain instead on land until it is calm. Sigurd said, Tell me, Fafnir, if you are so wise, who are the Norns who separate sons from their mothers? Fafnir replied, They are many and sundry. Some of them are race of Aesir, some are the race of elves, some are the daughters of Dvalin. Sigurd said, What is the name of that island where Surt and the Aesir will mix together their blood? Fafnir answered, It is called Oskapt, the uncreated. And again Fafnir spoke, My brother Regin caused my death, but it glads me that he will also cause your death, and it will go as he wishes. Again Fafnir spoke, I have borne a helm of terror over the people since I lay on my brother's inheritance, and I blew poison in all directions around me, so that none dared come near me, and I feared no weapon. I never found so many men before me that I did not think myself stronger, and everyone was afraid of me. Sigurd said, This helm of terror you speak of gives victory to few, because each man who finds himself in company with many others must at one time discover that no one is the boldest of all. Fafnir answered, I suggest you take your horse and ride away as fast as you can, because it often happens that he who receives a mortal wound avenges himself. Sigurd said, That is your advice, but I will do otherwise. I will ride to your den and there take the massive hoard of gold which your kin possessed. Fafnir replied, You will ride there where you will find so much gold that it will be plentiful for the rest of your days, and that same gold will be your death, as it will be the death of all who possess it. Sigurd stood up and said, I would ride even though it would mean losing this great treasure, if I knew that I would never die. But every brave man wants to be wealthy until that one day, and you, Fafnir, lie in your death throes until hell has you. Then Fafnir died. All right. So yeah. Regin and Sigurd go riding to find Fafnir after Sigurd comes home from avenging his father. And Regin, again, is like, bullying Sigurd, saying, Yeah, I thought you were a Volsung. I thought you were a badass like your father and your fathers before him. So, like, what are you so afraid of? Sigurd's looking at this, these tracks of this serpent, or as Odin calls it, the worm, and it's huge. It's like, this thing might be like, a T-Rex with wings. And he's like, yeah, this thing looks a little bit bigger than you described. And Regin's like, nah, you'll be fine. It's not a big deal. Yeah, I'm going to go this way. And he just takes off running. So Sigurd decides, well, this thing is going to crawl to get a drink of water from this lake or whatever. So I'll dig a ditch. And as it crawls over me, because I'll be hidden, I'll be able to stab up at it when it crawls over my ditch. And that's how I'll kill it. And who shows up? Yeah, it's the one-eyed god Odin again. And Odin says, what are you doing, kid? And Sigurd is, digging his ditch. He's like, oh, I'm going to dig this ditch so when the dragon Fafnir comes over the ditch, I can stab up and kill him. And then Odin says, yeah, but if you do that, like, it's going to bleed out into your ditch and you're going to drown into his blood. So dig that one ditch, but, dig outlet ditches so that, when this thing bleeds down into your ditch, the blood has somewhere to go. And so Sigurd says, yeah, that's actually a good idea. That's what he does. And then Fafnir does come along as the dragon, as the serpent, and comes over Sigurd's ditch. And he's lying in there, probably trying to keep still like he's in a coffin. And then as he sees the dragon's belly come over his ditch, he takes the mythical Gram and he thrusts up and buries the sword up to the hilt and stabs Fafnir in the heart. But I guess this stab wasn't enough to drop him immediately, and they have a conversation afterwards. And Fafnir says, who are you? What are you doing here? What family are you from? Sigurd lies to him, and Fafnir says, yeah, that's a lie. And then eventually he says, I'm a Volsung. And he goes, well, I suspect my brother Regin has a hand in this. But mark my words, you've killed me now. Other people were afraid of me because I spewed poison everywhere, and I had the image and the size of a huge dragon. I was intimidating. But even if you take my life and you steal my gold, the gold will still be the death of you. Sigurd is like most typical epic heroes, very proud of himself, arrogant. And he says, well, you know what? That's your advice. I'm still going to take your gold. I'm going to be rich beyond my wildest dreams. You're going to die. And that's the way it's going to be. So he doesn't heed Fafnir's warning, and he says he's going to take the hoard of treasure. And just like in Tolkien's story with Smaug the dragon, the gold is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing when you first obtain it, but it curses you for your days thereafter. And this was Fafnir's warning before dying to Sigurd, is like, if you want to end up like I did, you will take the gold. If you don't, you will ride away and forget you were ever here. Sigurd, unfortunately, refuses Fafnir's advice and becomes the proud hero and goes into the dwelling, the cave of Fafnir for his riches. All right, we'll move now to chapter 19. Regin drinks Fafnir's blood. 65. After Fafnir died, Regin came to Sigurd and said, "Hail, my lord, you have won a great victory, and you have killed Fafnir. None before you were so bold as to dare sit in his path, and this glorious feat will live on in the world as the world remains." Regin stood and looked down at the ground for a long time. Then afterward he said with much emotion, "You've killed my brother, but I am hardly blameless in this deed." Sigurd took his sword Gram, dried it off in the grass, and said to Regin, "You went quite far away when I performed this deed. I tested this sharp sword with my own hand, pitting my strength against the serpent's might, while you lay in a heather bush, confused, not knowing whether it was heaven or earth." Regin answered, "That serpent might have lain a long time in his den if you had not enjoyed the sword I made for you with my own hands. Neither you or anyone else would have accomplished this deed." Sigurd replied, "When men come to battle, a fearless heart serves a man better than a sharp sword." Then out of deep sorrow, Regin repeated to Sigurd, "You have killed my brother, and I can hardly be considered blameless in this deed." Then Sigurd cut the heart out of the serpent with his sword called Regin. Regin drank Fafnir's blood and said, "Grant me one request, a trifle for you. Go to the fire with the heart, roast it, and give it to me to eat." Sigurd went and roasted Fafnir's heart on a spit, and when the juice foamed out, he tested it with his finger to see whether it was done. He stuck his finger in his mouth, and when the blood from the serpent's heart touched his tongue, he could understand the speech of birds. He heard the nuthatches chirping in the brush near him. Okay. Yeah, so this gets a little weird now, right? So Regin finally comes back and he's like, "Oh my God, you did it. You actually killed Fafnir. That's amazing. You're going to be famous for as long as the world is the world." And then Sigurd looks at him and says, "Yeah, I did this, yeah, and you were nowhere to be found. You ran away kind of fast, and you kind of, tucked your tail." But then reality hits Regin, and he says, "I helped you kill my brother, and I'm blameworthy here." And then Sigurd looks at Gram and says, "Well, what's done is done, and I did this great deed, and this will be my legacy." But then Regin says, after being called a coward for running away, he's like, "Well, technically, you killed my brother Fafnir the dragon that everyone was afraid of because he was, a poison-spewing dragon. But you held Gram in your hand, and I made that sword for you. So technically, it was kind of like a group effort, right? It was kind of like a tag team thing." And then Sigurd kind of looks at him and says, "Yeah, you made me this sword. That's cool and everything, but a fearless heart is what's needed in battle more than any sharp weapon. But thanks for your sword. Appreciate it. It's actually my dad's sword that you just kind of remade. But I guess I'll give you that much credit." And then Regin looks down at the ground and he's sad over the fact that his brother's still dead. Then he makes this weird request. He says, "I'm going to drink his blood, and I grant that you offer me this you grant me this one request. Cut out his heart, go roast it, and I'm going to eat it." Yeah, so he's upset over his brother's death, but he says, I got a favor to ask. I'm going to drink some of his blood. Can you roast the dragon's heart and cook it so it's done, and I'll eat it?" Sigurd, I guess, agrees and says, "Sure." He cuts the heart out, and then Sigurd goes to roast the heart, and as it's cooking, I guess he's somewhat of a chef. He sticks his hand or his finger on the heart to, I guess, gauge the temperature, and then licks the blood off of his finger. And when he does, he is gifted with this ability to hear the language of the birds. which is kind of cool. So it's like he's roasting this giant, dragon heart on the spit, licks the blood of the dragon, and instantly he has this gift where he can hear birds chatting to each other. Like, what would that sound like? Like, what do birds talk about each day? It's like, did you find any worms? No worms. How's the nest going? Pretty good. Yeah, I got I guess 4 pieces of straw yesterday. Got 4 pieces of straw the day before that. It's almost there. Yeah, yep. Got to have a nest. So anyway, I guess Sigurd now has the ability to hear the language of birds, and he was gifted that by licking the blood off of his finger, which was Fafnir's blood as the dragon. Okay, last chapter, page 66. Sigurd eats the serpent's heart. And it says, "There sits Sigurd roasting Fafnir's hearts. Better he should eat it himself," said a bird. "Then he would be wiser than any man." Another said, "There lies Regin, who wants to betray the one who trusts him." Then a third spoke, "He should strike Regin's head off. Then he alone could control the huge store of gold." Then a fourth spoke, "Sigurd would be wise to follow their advice. Afterward he should ride to Fafnir's den and take the magnificent hoard of gold which is there, and then ride up to Hinderfell, where Brynhild sleeps. There he will find great wisdom. He would be wise to take your advice and consider his own deeds. I suspect a wolf where I see a wolf's ears." Then a fifth said, "He is not as wise as I thought if he spares Regin after having killed his brother." Then a sixth spoke, "It would be wise, of course, if Sigurd killed Regin and took the treasure for himself." Then Sigurd said, "It will not be my ill fate that Regin shall be my death. Rather, both brothers should go the same way." He now drew the sword Gram and cut off Regin's head. After that he ate some of the serpent's heart and kept some. He then leapt onto his horse and rode along Fafnir's trail until he came to the lair, which he found open. All the doors were made of iron, as were all the fastenings. All the posts in the house were also of iron, and they had been sunk into the earth. There Sigurd found an enormous store of gold, as well as the sword Hroti. He took from there the helm of terror, the golden coat of chainmail, and many other precious things. He found so much gold that he expected it to be more than 2 or even 3 horses could carry. He took all the gold and put it into 2 large chests, and then took Grani by the bridle. The horse would not budge, and whipping was useless. Sigurd now discovered what the horse wanted. He leapt onto his back and put spurs to him, and the horse ran as if uncumbered. Okay. So yeah, maybe my conversation about the birds was not quite accurate, because Sigurd is roasting this heart. He licks the blood of Fafnir, hears the birds talking, and it's as though the birds are like completely aware of what this whole errand was about and what it was over, and who Regin is. They say it's like, yeah, Fafnir was Regin's brother. Sigurd would be wise to kill Regin as well, because who's to say that Regin may feel remorse after this is over and try to get revenge on Sigurd? Or what if they get the gold and Regin double crosses him and tries to steal more than his share? It would be wise if Sigurd killed Regin. Does everyone agree? Yeah, I agree. And then all these birds are like of this opinion. And it's almost like, it almost reads like a peyote trip. Like Sigurd is sitting there roasting this heart, and he hears these birds like conspiring with him to kill Regin. And he stands up, he's like, yeah, I should kill Regin. That's probably for the best. And then he goes and cuts off his head. So Regin, the foster father of Sigurd, out of the picture. This is part of the curse of gold, right? The curse of gold already starts, working its evil magic into the life of Sigurd. He kills Regin, his foster father, because I guess the birds told him so, because they thought it would be a good idea. And now the gold is all his, and he loads it up on Grani. Grani won't move because I guess he has to feel the spurs. And Sigurd spurs Grani on, and the horse runs off and carries Fafnir's gold with him and Sigurd back home. And that is where we will leave it for part 2. So yeah, we were finally introduced to our hero Sigurd. We learned of the tale of Fafnir and Fafnir's gold, the dragon. Regin, foster father, didn't quite have a happy ending for him, but we met him. We get introduced to Gram, the Excalibur, the magical weapon that our epic hero wields, and the curse of the gold that is already starting to take shape after the death of Fafnir and Sigurd's acquisition of it. Right, okay, yeah. Odin showed up a lot in this one too. Of course, some people knew who he was, and then I guess we were supposed to pretend like we didn't know who he was. The guy with the one eye and long beard. One eye, long beard, spear, cloak. It's Odin, right? We know that now. Anyway, we will pick up with part 3 in the Saga of Volsungs, and we will continue on with the story of our hero Sigurd, and we will meet Brunhild, who of course is the love interest of Sigurd. And we will learn about those two lovebirds' tale for the next part, which will be part 3. I appreciate everyone sticking around. If you're still here, this is, again, Saga of Volsungs part 2 on the Hoplite channel. If you're liking the story, or if you're liking the Norse literature series, give it a thumbs up. Share it with friends or family if you think they would enjoy it as well. And we will see you back here for part 3. Till then, take care.